Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. I'm very excited actually for today's episode because it's one of the few times I get to bring in some of my favorite topics, which is chess, which I talk about a lot on this show, and also leadership. And to help us explore that, I have Danny Rensch. He's the Chief Chess Officer at chess.com. He's an international master himself, and he's also a frequent commentator on some of the world's top chess events, hosts some of the world's top chess events as well. Danny, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm very, very excited about this because chess comes up a lot in the conversations and the podcasts I have on the show. My grandmother taught me how to play chess when I was very little. I mean, I never took it as seriously as you to become an IM, but it's a big passion for me. I follow all the events. I know all the players. I take lessons with actually somebody you know, JJ.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, so
That's
he's
fantastic.
So he's a grandmaster at UC San Diego now. So I've been taking a lot of lessons with him. But let's talk a little bit about your story and how you got involved in chess, because you are an international master, and a lot of people might not be familiar with what that even means. So
Yeah.
let's start with your story, how you got to where you are, and what is an international master and kind of the rank of the chess world.
Yeah, it's funny. The story for me in regards to chess is actually a bit of a wild one, and I'm going to say kind of a weird thing maybe you didn't know was going to be coming at the top of this podcast is I'm actually in the middle of writing a memoir right now about my life,
Ah.
specifically through the lens of my childhood and the story in the context of how I got into chess. I'm not gonna go into that, and no, this is not a promo for my memoir coming out next year. But the reason I'm saying that is because I have a very unique upbringing, because I was actually brought up in a spiritual collective, one that some might have deemed a cult, depending on your interpretation of the topic. And I learned how to play chess in this very small community, and ultimately, you could argue, sort of thrived because of the dynamic there that came with its own set of really weird experiences that I've been in therapy about for years, processing out my childhood. But there's a weird intersection between would I have gotten as good at chess at such a young age if I hadn't been raised in this very unique set of circumstances, which is kind of like and seen, because here's a guy who's kind of accidentally, I guess you could call me one of the leaders of the free chess world, and I maybe wouldn't be here if I hadn't started playing chess pretty intensely as a child, being raised in this spiritual collective. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But that's really my story that I haven't actually talked a
Hmm.
lot about publicly. In fact, you're the second podcast that I've ever mentioned that particular fact on. But what happened was I started playing chess very young. Without getting into the rated R details of what happened in the family life, I was very encouraged and I don't want to necessarily say forced, but I was pushed heavily into chess at a very young age, and I was an All-American chess player many times over, which is like an actual thing. I was ranked among the top players in the country. And in the world, I guess, for my age. And I was a successful scholastic chess player at a pretty high level, and got to the international master level very young. Um, but then two things happened at the same time. I had some personal health issues around the time that this collective was kind of actually falling apart, and the internet happened. I remember where I was when I said, "What's YouTube?" Someone was like, "You got to watch this video." I'm like, "Where can I see it?" They're like, "What's YouTube?" Right? So we started checking out chess content on the internet, and right around that time is when Eric and Jay, the co-founders of chess.com, and I met. And I've often been kind of given honorary co-founder status because I came in very, very early after them, and was ultimately kind of put in a position to be a leader of the content and the community and ultimately the events and the broadcasts we do. But as a player, to answer your question, I was playing internationally, traveling the world, probably a professional chess player already by the age of 15. And while I didn't make the highest rankings or the elite status that I once hoped and dreamed for as a player individually, pivoting into chess business because of my health problems and because of the dawning of what is now the era we all live in terms of the internet and the technology space, I pivoted with an international master title more into chess business rather than pursuing a career as a player. So how's that for an answer that maybe you didn't see coming?
No, I had no idea. I'm actually very excited to read this memoir. I saw you recently did a fun video on the chess.com. I think it was the chess.com YouTube channel with you and Levy Rousman, another international master. You guys did a lie detector test and asked each other some fun questions, which I enjoyed there. So for people who are not familiar with what an IM is, what's a GM, how does this
Yeah.
work? Where
Yeah.
is an international master in terms of rank, and what is your actual rating? Is it at
Okay.
2,300 somewhere?
Yeah, sorry, I blew past that point for the larger question you asked, which is how did I get involved in chess? So there you go. But so the way the chess world works is there is a hierarchy status that starts with the Grandmaster title at the top. The Grandmaster title is a ranking that is given to people roughly of the 25 to 2600 plus level. Now, ultimately, you can get much better than that and become one of the best players in the world, but the Grandmaster title is the highest status you can achieve. The second highest title you can achieve is International Master, which is my title. Both the Grandmaster and the International Master title are special in the sense that it's a very rigorous process in order to earn them. You can't earn a Grandmaster or International Master title just based on your rating. You also have to have competed in a certain amount of international events and performed at a certain level in those events. And so you could say that a good comparison is the Grandmaster and International Master titles are the professional levels of the game. So
Mm,
even if an IM only sits on the bench in in the NBA team, right? Whereas there's people who are having longer careers, you can't get an IM or a GM title unless you've competed at a professional level, basically.
got it.
After the Grandmaster and International Master titles, we move to titles that are based purely on rating. And those titles are FIDE Master, which is FIDE is the International Chess Federation. It stands for Dallas Fidelis Eches des Internation, which is basically the International Chess Federation in French. So you can have a FIDE Master title, which starts at about the 2300 level rating, or a National Master title below that, which is a master within your own country. So in reverse order, you can be a chess master, a national master, a FIDE master, or one of the professional titles, which is IM or GM, International Master or Grandmaster. Below that in chess, people have ratings, and ratings are based on your performance of wins and losses depending on the person you're playing and their rating coming into the game. It's similar to tennis in that sense, for
Mm,
people who know how that system works. But
yeah.
the elo ranking system is a performance predictive system that allows people to compete against levels of competition that are appropriate, and ultimately as you gain an elo rating, you can earn your way toward the titles that I laid out. And that's essentially the infrastructure that kind of governs the chess world and helps people understand how good they are.
So there are a few topics I want to get into today. Obviously, one is chess.com. From what I understand, you guys are at around 800 people, fully remote. I also wanted to touch a little bit on some of
You
the.
give me anxiety when you say 800 people fully remote, because it's true, and reminding me is a little scary. But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, that's a massive. A lot of people probably wouldn't think about that, but it's the size of a lot of like mid-size software companies. I mean, 800 probably approaching 1,000 people soon, and you guys have scaled ridiculously quickly over the past few years, which we can get into as well. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the parallels between chess and leadership, chess and business, chess and life. But I thought it would be really interesting to start off with what's required, right? Because a lot of people see a chess player, they see an IM or a grandmaster, and they think, "Oh, great, they're good at chess." Very few people realize the amount of work and effort that's required, and how much analysis and how much playing. Can you give people some context, like for your level, and a lot of the work that you were doing is before these crazy supercomputers even that we have now when you were an IM.
Yeah.
But when you look at like a Magnus or a Hikaru or a Fabiano, one of these world's top chess players, what is required today to be at the top? And I kind of want to draw a parallel to this as far as like being at the top in chess versus also the work that's required to be a top leader, right? And how much
Yeah.
effort is required there. So what does it take?
It's a good comparison, I guess, speaking as a stressed out executive, which I guess is something I never would have thought I would have ever referred to myself as, but one day we woke up and the chess world was a big world, and chess.com was a real company. It's it's a 24/7, I guess you could say, process. And so one of the mental health challenges, just to speak directly to that, both as an executive leader and as I would argue a professional chess player, is you kind of have to decide when it stops, right? The
Mm.
job itself has no 9 to 5 confines in it. And I think that there's the pros and the cons that people talk about in that environment, right? You are your own boss. Sounds great, sounds sexy, right? Also, you are your own boss, and everything falls on you to ultimately achieve the levels that you're aspiring to achieve. And I think in chess, it is a game that can be 100% all consuming with your thought process. And so you have to decide when it stops, because chess is like this really unique thing in that it's it's a game of defined information, 64 squares with pieces set, yet we can't solve it,
Yeah.
right? We can put a man on the moon and we can't, even the best computers still are making up new ideas every day, right? It's the world's most unsolvable puzzle, and you will spend a lifetime trying to study it and truly never master it. And
Mm.
and so to compete at the highest levels, it's to make a direct comparison, like, this is a 24/7 job. Now, how do you manage your own bandwidth within that 24/7 job? Is it 8 hours a day sometimes? Is it 12 hours a day sometimes? Right? Both a top grandmaster player and like an executive would probably draw a similar comparison, right? Sometimes you feel like you have like an 80-hour week, and it's literally that level of chess, from a preparation level at home with your team, with supercomputers, preparing novel ideas, getting ready to execute, and then you are working over the board for hours at a time to outthink your opponent, right? So you can have 80-hour weeks, and then you might have weeks that are less than that. But overall, I would say the level required to maintain the status of a top chess professional is 8 hours a day, I guess, to choose the average number, right? It takes that much work in order to do it. And in order to achieve it, I mean, it's a lifetime commitment. It's funny when you see videos where you see like people, for content saying, "I committed to become a chess master," this and that. Like, none of those videos end with someone actually becoming a chess master in 8
Yeah.
weeks. Like, it's not something that you can do or pull off, right? And so it is a game that will take a lifetime to understand, and maybe dozens more to master. And I use master loosely, right? You can reach
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
master
Yeah.
level, but even Magnus Carlsen would probably admit freely that he has a lot of things he still learns about chess all the time, which is kind of one of the things that keeps people obsessed with it.
Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. It'll literally take you 1 second, and you'll get notified when more videos just like this one are available. Now, let's get back to the content. Yeah, and I draw so many parallels there with leadership too. And even I think Magnus, and for context, people who don't know who Magnus is, he's the world's top chess player, highest rated player of all time. No longer the world champion because he gave up his title. But even I've heard a lot of top chess players interviewed, and sometimes they even dream of chess, right? They dream of chess pieces, they dream of moves. And just like in leadership, when you make a mistake, it's easy to beat yourself up. There's also the mental health issues. There's kind of the calculation and sitting there. So there's so many parallels there. When you think about the mindsets of chess players, because obviously you've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of them over the years, what do you find is a consistent pattern among the world's top chess players? Like what are they doing that other players who are 1 or 2 steps below them are not doing or haven't figured out?
Wow, that's a big. You're putting me on the chair of being interviewed like I'm a top chess player. These days,
Yeah.
I'm interviewing the world's top
Yeah,
chess
you talk
players.
to
So
because like a Fabiano or a Magnus or a Hikaru who are all top 5 players. Clearly, there's a lot of players who are 2,600, 2,500 who are very good, and they also dedicate their life to chess, but they're not at that level yet. Similarly, when we think about business, there are a lot of like really successful and amazing leaders out there, and there are also a lot of leaders who are stuck in mid-level leadership roles who cannot move forward. So I'm always curious,
yeah.
what separates the top performers from those who are not bad, but they're just not able to get there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Probably one that, on the topic itself is worthy of hours of conversation, but I'll give you my humble opinion on what I've observed, I guess, if we want to talk about the patterns, and maybe some of the common traits. I would start with one of the things that seems to be a common characteristic is and we see this terminology used in high level of sports success, there is a little bit of where the perfect intersection is of supreme confidence meets like self-reflection
Mm.
along with short-term memory loss. And what I'll say about that is this, meaning there's this there's this kind of never satisfied attitude of self-reflecting about their own mistakes. And we often say that as a chess player, the true champions are not only improving on their losses, they're improving on their wins, right? And so
Ah,
whether that's an issue we should unpack in therapy because there's a never satisfied Alexander Hamilton reference of they will never be satisfied, and there's a level of self-reflection and sort of like desire for perfection that is just innate within them, right? And so even if they play a great game, you will just notice their inability to talk about what they did well, but they can remember their bad losses from 10 effing years ago. You get what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
there's a trait of lack of satisfaction and but a willingness to self-reflect in that, not like in a victim mindset, because unfortunately you do talk to a lot of people who have the list of reasons of why something's not working out,
Yeah.
and they tend to be a lot of finger pointing
That's
versus a
that's very common in
self-reflective
the business
mindset
world as well.
of ownership, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that if you were to design the robot, if you were to build them from scratch, you would want this excuse me, like this you would want dissatisfaction to be a shared and common trait, because growth happens with dissatisfaction is the first and required step toward healthy growth. If
Hmm.
you're not dissatisfied with the status quo, you cannot grow. If you are satisfied, then you're not growing, right? So the perfect intersection of where dissatisfaction meets the willingness to self-reflect, meaning lack of finger pointing, is something that I think they all share. And you can just see this in their interviews, in their rare ability to compliment themselves despite playing what we would deem as near perfect chess, their ability to remember losses from years ago. But then I think where real confidence comes in, and I'm drawing a triangle because I think in my brain I notice the patterns of where they all kind of work together, is there's also, and I go back to a book that I read at one point called Talent is Overrated, and I remember there's a lot of things about the book I remember. One of Jeff Calvin is, it's a fantastic book, but I remember one of the things about a commonly shared trait of, he called them the great white sharks of any particular sport or industry, was where the because they've done the work, they carry this sort of supremely confident ability to have short-term memory loss. Like they don't beat themselves up over mistakes as well, right? It's almost like Eric and I use the mindset. Eric is co-founder of chess.com. You're never losing if you're learning. That doesn't mean we dismiss the opportunity to reflect on what went wrong, but it means a very quick and confident ability to acknowledge that mistakes were made, cut your losses, and move on to the next situation, right? So I think if you're designing the right mindset for a chess player, and I can get into other things as far as, I don't understand. I'm not a doctor, and I would argue that very few people really understand the inner workings of the brain, on this level anyway. But there's probably some sort of genetic predisposition, maybe some version of a photographic memory, even if it's like a disposable Kodak photographic memory, some version of what their brain does in terms of dealing with pattern recognition, the ability to calculate and see ahead. Where if you don't work that muscle when you're young, it's not there
Yeah.
when you're older. So I think it is true that chess is like a language. I think more than math than people realize. Chess is very much a language you learn to speak. When someone's reading a page, speed reading, they're comprehending and consuming pages in blocks in ways that someone, if you hear a basic reader, what are they doing? They're literally sounding out not just the words, but the letters,
Yeah.
right? Whereas as someone who's fluent in the language is comprehending and consuming at a pace that is much more broadly than the brain's actual requirement to sound out every word,
Well,
right?
it's funny you
And
mention
so
that because
chess is a very complex language. It is
yeah.
being read in a holistic way based on pattern recognition and experience, much more than it is a complex math problem. I think that's actually a common myth people don't understand. It doesn't mean that people can't calculate very far ahead, but really they are comprehending the language of the position and seeing patterns that you don't see as a weaker chess player,
Yep.
right? In a very holistic fashion. So that is clearly something they're doing as far as the actual X's and O's of what chess is. But in terms of the broader traits, I would put it at again, I'll just summarize again with never satisfied, an ability to self-reflect and not point fingers, because chess is the most intimate intellectual experience you will ever have. Because when you lose, somebody was smarter than you.
Yep.
This is not a team game. There's nobody to point a finger at. So there's nothing to do but to self-reflect. And so no satisfaction, self-reflection, and supreme confidence that allows them to have short-term memory loss when it really matters would be traits I see pretty much across the board in their personality.
I think there was actually some studies that were done where they took chess players, because a lot of people think they have photographic memories, but I think there were some experiments that were done where they take chess players and they put them in other areas to see if they really do have a photographic memory in other aspects outside of chess. And from what I remember, all the experiments said that they don't. It's just specifically in that realm of chess. It's like, for example, if you're a really good plumber or you're a really good electrician, you really master all the components of that particular area. And it might seem like you just know how the components of a computer or a jet engine are put together. But if all of a sudden you get taken out of that environment and thrown into, I don't know, playing chess, for example, you're not all of a sudden just going to learn how all the pieces move. So I love that combination.
Study you're talking about.
Yeah.
No, I know the exact study you're talking about, and it is 100% true. I think that, again, people have this sort of myth that every chess player is some, massive IQ savant, right? But in reality, it's like any other, very deliberate practice. Someone who deliberately practices a drop shoulder turnaround jumper 10,000 times, like makes that shot even against the best competition, right? Someone who specifically studies chess understands chess. And the study that was done was they took 20 chessboards and they did a test with a group of grandmasters versus a group of people who had a photographic memory or had been like studied and tested, right? And when they did famous chess positions, well-known chess positions, the grandmasters remembered literally like all 20 boards exactly as they stood. And the photographic memory people remembered, I think on the average, it was like 12 to 14, because for them, they have a photographic memory, but it's a massive amount of information, right? Then they did the same exercise where they set up the chessboards with completely nonsensical positions, in fact, illegal positions. The grandmasters remembered like close to zero, and the photographic memory people remembered the exact same amount, right? Like somewhere in the 12 to 14 range. And so that sort of proved the theory of the innate patterns and memory muscles that chess builds in a grandmaster's brain.
Yeah, and I love those three components of self-reflection, because I talk about that a lot in the context of leadership, right? And you probably go through that too, and I'm sure your executive team does as well. Your strengths, your weaknesses, what you can improve on, how you're impacting other people. Dissatisfaction, I love also. It's like a healthy dissatisfaction, because a lot of the top CEOs that I've interviewed, they're constantly striving to, for example, Frank Blake, he's the former CEO of the Home Depot. And when I interviewed him, he said, one of the few things that people forget about leaders, or that don't understand about leaders, is that leaders, their responsibility is to do more and they care more. And so he was constantly trying to do more than everybody else, to care more than everybody else, because it's his company, his team, he's responsible. So I love that healthy dissatisfaction piece. It's funny. So I used to play competitive chess when I lived in San Francisco at the Mechanics Chess Club there. And I used to take the ferry building.
Love the Mechanics Institute.
Yeah, I used to play there all the time, and in LA far less frequently. But people always ask me, like, what's the most uncomfortable thing that you've done? And I speak at a lot of conferences every year, sometimes in front of thousands of people, and I'm more okay with that. And I always say that the most uncomfortable I get, what puts me the most out of my comfort zone, is when I'm sitting playing a chess game. And even like the day where I know I'm playing, because they used to have Monday tournaments, and even like the day that like if it's the morning and they would play, for example, at 6 o'clock at night, I would already be like nervous during the day. I would take the ferry building. I would try to like review some things on the computer, and just sitting across from the other person, you could like, I feel like my heart beating out of my chest. It's just so uncomfortable. And few people realize that, just how uncomfortable it is. And just when you're playing, when you think you're winning or you think you're losing, it can really just screw with your head. And again, I draw a lot of parallels there with leadership, because in leadership too, you're having negotiations, whether it's one-on-one or with a team. You have to practice patience. You have to know how to control your own emotions. You have to pay attention to the body language of other people. You have to calculate. You have to look for patterns. There's just so much there between the chess and the business world. What do you think some of the more common relationships there are?
Ah, another really good big question. You should do a podcast. So,
Yeah.
one second, clear my throat. First of all, I want to just validate and agree, even if it's not the best endorsement, or if I'm speaking to the casually interested chess enthusiasts out there, to acknowledge that playing in chess tournaments can be a very, like, I use the term, it's intimate in terms of its challenge, right? It's especially because, unfortunately, I think a lot of people have directly associated their own intellect and had a feeling of, hey, if I lose this chess game, I'm not smart enough to play
Yeah.
chess. And I actually want to say that I think one of the things that chess.com has worked super hard on is kind of breaking down that barrier, crashing down that wall, if you will, with a wrecking ball, and just making sure that people understand that the process of getting better at chess can be something you embrace, embracing the process versus the result, in a way that can be super healthy and allow chess to be an experience that is rewarding, even in its most difficult and trying times. That said, I am going to say that, especially at the highest levels of chess, there's no denying the stress that you go through, right? And then also, I guess, to use your comparison, the highest levels of business, right? You're constantly in a position to, what did he say? Care more and
Do
and
more
and
and care
think
more.
more, and it feels like it's a nonstop, never-ending process. And it's interesting because you can't expect everybody in a company to feel that way all the time. You can't expect people, you know, through all different levels and whatever you want to say, their tenure at the company, their reasons for being there, their particular department. For some, chess is literally, at chess.com, chess is literally like me, the thing that they have been obsessed with and committed to since they were kids. And the fact that they have a job, something they even would call a job that pays the bills, is like the most mind-blowingly awesome dream in the world, right? And then there are others who, you know, maybe never played chess before they came to chess.com, but now they serve the chess community in like a really important way. And the reason I'm setting up the comparison between that dichotomy of, like, maybe someone who works in a really critical role at chess.com who doesn't give a bleep about chess necessarily, versus the person who's obsessed with the game and considers working at chess.com a career that they couldn't have dreamed of. We navigate both those relationships in the same way, in that we think that we can have the environment where people feel committed to the mission, I guess the purpose of the company, the why of the company, regardless of their feelings about chess itself, right? And obviously, I know that that's a very buzzworthy thing to say these days, and I would say that chess.com was mission driven, and has a track record of being mission driven long before that was a sexy buzzworthy term, because frankly, we experience the definition of overnight success 15 years later of almost dying for the company, right? Obviously, in the last few years, what's happened with chess, from the pandemic drastically increasing the number of people in a short period of time, who, by the way, have not gone away, they're still here. Then the
What were
next
you
cohort of
can you
users,
actually
to
do a
use the
little
business term.
yeah, can
What?
you do a little comparison pre-pandemic versus where we are
Yeah,
now,
I
just
will.
so people can see, like,
Yeah,
how many people you had working there, how many users?
yeah.
'Cause the growth has just been
No,
nuts.
I will, and to finish what I was saying real quick, and I'm going to touch on that, is there was the pandemic cohort, then there was the Queen's Gambit on Netflix cohort, right? Then there was a cohort in this last year where we saw, just via our investments in short form content, getting lucky with a few viral memes, literally, and for some reason, every celebrity and their cousin coming out is playing chess. It is just everywhere. We have seen another massive intake, and to give you number, give you the data on that, because you asked, the mission had to drive us, because the bottom line was, we almost had no bottom line. Not in that we were careless, we were completely bootstrapped, no VC money, no debt, but also no real profitability for so many years. We had a group of leaders, and every single person at the company, even if they didn't play chess, was mission driven to the benefits of chess, the cognitive development for
Yeah.
kids, the good things that chess does. We think chess makes the world a smarter place and is better than video games. You can disagree with us or not, but we really believed in the mission, and everybody, regardless of their love of chess, felt that way. And then what happened was, entering 2020, we had about 170 team members, and we had about just under 1 million daily active users. By the end of, so that was after nearly, 15 years if you go back to when we were founded in 2005, really probably 10 years since the company was really, really rolling. So it had taken us 10 years to get there. At the end of 2020, we had 5 million daily active users.
Wow.
Sorry, we had just under a million daily active users and maybe 5 million monthly. At the end of 2020, we had 5 million daily active users and 50 million monthly. And at the end of the Queen's Gambit and then this last boom area at our peak, we were at 15 million daily active users and almost 80 million monthly, and about 60 million weekly. Again, these are measured on different ways that you measure these cycles, rolling 90-day cycles, different things. But obviously the growth story there is pretty exponential.
Crazy.
And we now have, as you said at the top of the podcast, almost 800 team members. We're trying to be, as responsible as we can in that process. I personally hope we're not at 1,000 people overnight because I want to make sure we continue to sort of recognize the opportunity and keep everybody focused on the things that matter versus always chasing the next idea you have. And you can quickly get irresponsible if you're not careful. And so we're very cognizant of that and want to be fiscally and morally responsible to the team and to how we're scaling and investing in the community. Just putting that out there. It's something we think about a lot right now because most people would not have ever bet on chess being where it is now.
No, never.
And yeah, that's a very, very quick number story.
So in a few years, you went from 175 employees to around 800. So more than quadruple the size in terms of headcount. And in terms of users, you said it was from 1 million daily active users. And what is it today?
So as of today, it goes between 8 and 10 daily. So at our peak, early 2023, this last year, we were at almost 15 daily at one point. We have kind of since leveled off a little bit, and we're somewhere between 8 and 10, depending on the seasonality. For example, right now we're closer to 10 daily because the winter months tend to have just higher traffic.
That's crazy growth. I mean, I know a lot of software companies out there. Like I said, I've interviewed so many CEOs on this podcast. I can't remember a guest in recent memory that represented or was running a company that has scaled that quickly in such a short time period, because we're essentially talking about like 3-4 years here where you guys have quadrupled in size and become such a massive organization. So that's amazing. I wanted to get back to, so you mentioned this idea of mission driven. A lot of people believe in chess who work obviously at chess.com. Have you found, or have you heard from anybody else, either top GMs or whoever, does chess ever play a role in how you make strategic business decisions, in how you approach either personal or professional situations? Like, have you consciously bridged the gap between how you've approached chess versus how you live your life and how you lead a business?
There are answers of the yes and no variety, just to be honest, right? I think that, to speak directly to what I already said earlier, and I think a lot of chess players would admit that, as we already highlighted, the photographic memory test and the other, anecdotal stories I've told about chess really being much more a language than a sign of someone's IQ. Did you learn to read the language or not? And so therefore, are you fluent at a high level, a speed reading level of that language, or are you not? And I think that there are very specific skills that define a great chess player that are truly just unique and innate to the game. And you are reading a language that is specific to chess that makes you phenomenal, or whatever level you're at. It's a niche skill set. So I want to say that I don't think that the parallel needs to be expanded in a cliche manner, right? I do think the great chess players are really great at chess, and it doesn't necessarily make them more likely to be good at other things. I kind of want to say that because I think it's true to a certain degree. That said, there are obvious parallels between the process of the thought process, if you will, that makes a great chess player that I don't even know that chess players themselves appreciate, maybe would have made them good at business if they had taken other paths. And I personally did take that path, right? So I can speak to that. It's funny, I have this argument with super grandmaster friends at times where they've even said, like, Danny, like, that's total BS. A great chess player thinks he's good at everything else, but he's really not. They're just good at chess, right? And I'm kind of like, well, but the skills that make someone a great chess player outside of the specific language you're reading, the pattern recognition of the moves on the board, could make you good at other things. For example, again, as I already said, chess is the most intimate, intellectual, self-reflective process you can ever put yourself through because there is no one else to point at when you lose. And I think that muscle by itself is probably the most important thing for society as we move forward, is the ability to self-reflect in business or personal life. And I'm not trying to preach, but it's bleeping true. And I think we have too many opportunities to point fingers elsewhere, that we are not building those muscles, unfortunately, as someone with 4 kids, as early as we should at times. And so I think that's a thing that, again, that's not just a cliche thing to say, Jacob. People who are top chess players are learning that skill at a very young age because they have no other choice. They literally are reflecting on a level that is intimate and required in order to progress. So I think that's a huge muscle. The next thing is like literally critical thinking, the cause and effect. The consequences of your actions is literally right in front of you, considering what might happen to you if you make this decision. And I often say chess players start to break through not when they say, why did my opponent go there? That's a very good skill because you're having almost empathy. You're having a critical thinking process that acknowledges there are other pieces on the board that might have the ability to affect your happiness. So why did someone go there? But the next step is actually real chess players occur when they start saying, if I go there, what will they do next? Mm-hmm. Now you're actually taking a step that is literally calculating sort of the integrity of your decision, if you will, versus a self-consumed perspective of I can do what I want, right? And I think that if I'm drawing, and I'll end this very long answer with this, because I think that if there was one of the biggest business, strategic North Stars that we have, that Eric and I and the leadership team have kind of adhered to over time, kind of relates back to that last chess point, which is if I go there, what happens next? And that is the fact that we learned very early on the consequences of ever making decisions that the community didn't support. And the reason for that is because we don't own chess. We don't own our product. And I think while that goes in one ear, right the other, I can give you the strategic business reasons why that is a massively important thing to realize very early on. Because there's 2 ways to say the same thing, which is people who maybe judge, because chess is the original open source game. It's a piece of human history. It goes back forever, and the world should forever own this incredible game. We do consider ourselves shepherds and stewards and very fortunate ones because of our domain and because of those things. But that's not just BS corporate speak. It really is true in terms of the fundamental way we've done our business, because we have to think, if I go there, what will the community do on everything? Because literally any early mistake we made, and I can list them or we can just take my word for it, put us through the lens of, you can say the same thing 2 ways. You guys are monetizing an open source game. Or you can say like, you guys are monetizing an open source game. Damn. What have you guys learned how to do when you are never non-disruptible? Anybody can enter your space. You don't even own your own products. Anybody could literally rip off every product on our site. Like, other than maybe the IP and the logo, there's nothing stopping them from building the platform we have, which means the amount of R&D, the amount of analysis and just integrity that has to go in to really, really appreciating how it tastes and smells and feels to a user is massive. And so we turned away from decisions where people were like, you guys are missing way more ad revenue, or you guys are way under monetizing here, or put a Ford logo on E4. You guys are scaling 30 million games a day. What would that do with impressions, right? There are literal decisions we could make that look great on an 18-month P&L that could sink the company in 72 months. And understanding that you have to think in the consequences of what will they do next on a true level of the product itself, every area you invest in, and the ROI, product roadmap, things you're choosing, has been, man, just talking about it gives me anxiety. It has been the most exhausting process to lead, and honestly, it's still exhausting because we still feel like there are so many cool things to do. There are so many opportunities we haven't taken, and we have to constantly be thinking about that because we will never own the game, nor should we ever. And so we have to take an approach that is service-minded to the community first, because if we don't, If I told you there are dozens of other places on the internet to play chess, would you even believe me? Most people don't know. They know of a few of them, some of the bigger ones, but overall they don't. And that's because we've done a really good job, despite our critics, serving the community. And if we don't serve the community, they can go elsewhere. And I think that that has been something that has really kept us on track in some of the biggest moments. And there's my best answer I can give.
Great news. My brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, is now officially out, and I'm so excited to share the insights from the 100 CEOs and the 14,000 employees around the world that I surveyed. And the whole book explores why you should not be vulnerable at work, but why instead you should lead with vulnerability. In other words, don't just focus on exposing your gaps, but also talk about what you are doing to close those gaps. That's the difference between being vulnerable and leading with vulnerability. If you want to learn more and grab a copy, head over to leadwithvulnerability.com. Again, that is leadwithvulnerability.com. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge when you put it like that, right? You don't own the game, you don't own the product, and I'm trying to think of any other business that's like that where, I mean, I can't think of one outside of another game of any company where they don't actually own the business, right? Or they don't own the actual
I can give you one parallel, and I won't go into the intimate details I know of these businesses and the leadership of these different ones, but one that has experienced a lot of up and down, if you want to go back and look over the last 10 years, is one that is the most directly comparable to chess, and that's poker.
Oh, yeah.
PokerStars was the number one chess site and brand 5 years ago. You know where they are now? Number 3, fighting for number 2. There's a story there. And again, that's not even to call out PokerStars. There are companies that are number 1 now who didn't exist. The point is, there's actually a lot of parallels to that industry because they don't own the game. And what the do's and don'ts of pleasing the community and scaling appropriately, serving the professionals, understanding the ambassadorship of which every user carries because they are endorsing your product by their very presence. And that literally is not to call out anybody in that, but I'm pointing out, not because PokerStars might be number 1 tomorrow. And by the way, love you, PokerStars. Zero leadership criticism. I'm pointing out it's an industry that has seen some volatility at the top. Maybe chess.com in the future makes mistakes too. And the same thing can happen. And I would argue you have to be super thoughtful and have foresight in terms of how you're thinking about your investments because the community speaks with their actions and with their presence.
It's funny you mention that particular skill. So in a previous book I wrote called The Future Leader, I talked to 140 CEOs and I asked them what's the number 1 skill for current and aspiring leaders. And they all identified, which is what I call the skill of the futurist, which is being able to think in terms of scenarios and possibilities. And I always draw that analogy to chess, whereas sort of an amateur leader will think of, oh, I can just move my pawn and my opponent will just move their knight. And you just think of linear. Whereas a great leader will say, well, I could move my pawn. My opponent might move their knight. They might move their bishop. If they do one of those things, I might respond with this thing. And all of a sudden you have these different scenarios that you're playing out instead of just picking one path. Another one actually,
it's a probability tree.
Yeah.
Which is a funny comparison to modern AI because a lot of what the neural nets and the LLMs and these different things that we're investing in behind the scenes, but to not give more about the products we're kind of pushing forward. But there's the Monte Carlo tree system was actually a big investment into the core chess engines that followed the AlphaZero. Google's DeepMind project broke into the world.
Yeah, that was
literally
a great
turned chess
documentary.
upside down. Right, breaking down AI as a traditional weapon for chess, and now you see the open source community investing in these hybrid neural nets combined with the traditional way we taught the chess computers to think. And one of the things that we recognize is that by changing the approach to what we told the computers to do from make the best mathematical decision, which is based on a criteria we have set, if you think about it, versus the Monte Carlo tree system is literally, the entire existential kind of viewpoint is what increases my options and what doesn't, what increases the probabilities and roads. And so you're literally talking about executive and leadership decisions that are designed to increase the complexity of the problem, not as a weapon, not necessarily as a way of even eliminating places to go wrong, which is just a very fascinating parallel. So sorry to cut you off on that, but I think it's a really interesting thing that we've seen.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll have Eric on the show as well in the future too. We can talk even more about some of the business stuff. But one of the other things that just popped into my mind when you were talking, and we were talking about parallels between business and chess, and I actually wrote something on this for my Substack fairly recently. It was about this idea of seeing ghosts. And this is very frequent in the leadership world too. And so to give people an analogy, I remember at the Mechanics Chess Club a couple years ago before I moved to LA, I was playing a game and I was playing against somebody rated, 1650 or whatever. And I was going over the game with JJ and we're doing the analysis of the game. And he's like, I ended up losing the game. But as we were doing the analysis, he looks at me and he's like, you were totally winning. He's like, it must have been like plus 10 for you. And plus 10 basically is, for people not familiar with what that means, it just means if you were to look at it with an engine, there's no way you can lose. And he just looks at me and he's like, all you had to do was just keep pushing this pawn. Your opponent was stuck. Your opponent couldn't do anything. You just move the pawn down the board, get a queen, and you're done. And he's like, why didn't you do that? And I start giving him all these excuses. And I'm like, I thought he was going to go here. I thought he was going to go there. And he reminded me, he's like, Jacob, you were just seeing ghosts. You were seeing things that your opponent could do that really your opponent couldn't do. And I think the same thing, just to give another leadership analogy, is very common in leadership. Oftentimes we don't make decisions, or we do make decisions because we think something might be there that isn't, or we get worried about something that's never really there. So there's, I think, so many parallels between that, which, is tons that we can go over. But I want to transition a little bit to what I call the Leader's Toolkit section of the podcast, where we talk about something in particular for the next 15 minutes or so. And that's really, in this case, scaling a corporate culture and even scaling a business that is completely remote. So you're probably, again, I don't remember any company that is fully remote that is of your size. Maybe like WordPress, Automatic, they're a good size too. But there's very few companies that are your size that are fully remote. So let's talk a little bit about how did you scale that company? Are there maybe some specific and unique processes or tools that you have implemented at chess.com that allow you to stay connected and get things going? Because as you know, in today's business world, so many companies are saying, get back to the office, get back to work 3 days a week. You guys are fully remote. How do you make that work?
Yep.
My conversation with Danny Rensch continues as we talk about what it takes to scale a corporate culture, to scale a business for that matter, in a completely remote environment. If you remember, Danny mentioned they scaled their company from around 175 people before the pandemic to over 800 people now and still growing, but the company's always been remote. So how do you scale when your company is growing by more than 4x in terms of headcount in such a short time period? So in that bonus episode, Danny's going to share some of the techniques and things that they've implemented, some of the processes they have, and some of the tools that they're using. You can get access to that simply by subscribing to Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. When you do that, you'll get access to a bonus episode every single week, as well as ad-free listening. I also invite you to join our community, greatleadership.substack.com. The paid version is greatleadership.substack.com/GL podcast to get 20% off. And that's where I share exclusive articles, videos, lots of other fun stuff. And of course, if you want to grab a copy of my new book, Leading with Vulnerability, which is hanging out right next to me here, go to leadwithvulnerability.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody else who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.